Well, good morning. Good to see so many people out this morning. I want to welcome our visitors. We're glad that you're with us. I'm happy to have my in-laws in town with us. They've traveled a long way to be with us, and we've had a great week with them. We're thankful for all those who may be tuning in on our YouTube's Courthouse Church of Christ live stream channel. We're happy that you are joined and found us and joined us this morning. This morning's lesson is entitled Mzungu, taking our text from John 17, 13 to 18. My friend Andrew, who was my fellow traveler and preacher that went to Tanzania with me the first half of September, we had the three of us that went, me and Andrew and Ed, we had many interesting conversations, especially around breakfast and dinner, talking about our day and the day that was to come in the case of breakfast. And a lot of our conversations were centered around this word, because it was a word that we heard daily, hundreds of times during that trip. And we had many conversations of how this could apply to the spiritual. And Andrew told us he was going to work on something and then share it with us. And he shared this with his congregation several weeks ago, and I wanted to adapted it, added in some of my own experiences, and I wanted to share with you his thoughts as he put this together with the idea of being straying pilgrims. So I appreciate the song selection that Brother Chuck led us in singing. And the song that we're about to sing, This World Is Not My Home, we certainly knew that when we were in Tanzania. To illustrate how much I knew I didn't belong, or that it was a strange and foreign place to me, was every morning around 5:20, Muslim prayers began. And they were so loud, blaring over the speaker, that it woke us all up. And for many people in town, that was their alarm. And it told them, now's the time to get up and get your day going, so the businesses would then open around 6. And I knew, this is not my home. My alarm was not set for 5:20, but they were so loud we were rocked out of our beds at 5:20. And so that was a constant reminder that this was not my home. That was not what I was used to. So I want to ask a question this morning and begin with, have you ever had a real in the world, not of the world experience? Have you ever been someplace that seems so foreign to you that you realize very quickly you're out of place? Not everyone else, you're the one out of place. Have you ever been in a situation where you said, I'm not from here. I may not even belong here, but I'm here now. And now what? Anyone ever have a trip like that, or a moment like that, or perhaps a semester like that? I know some people have traveled abroad for school and attended different schools. Maybe you had a semester that way, where you felt, I'm the one who is out of place. Well, spending the first half of September in Tanzania was certainly an not of experience for me and my preacher friends who went with me. Andrew Roberts from Tampa, Florida, and Edward Smith from Paris, Tennessee, and then myself. We found ourselves in a world that was not ours. We found ourselves daily in situations and environments that were exciting. It was an adventure. There was opportunity to spread the gospel, but we knew every day we stuck out. We stood out from everyone else. One of the words we heard a lot from Christians and non-Christians alike was Mzungu or Wazungu. We found out Wazungu meant plural. And like real Mzungus, we used the English version and put an S at the end and just said Mzungus, when the actual word for plural is Wazungu. One time, one of those days that we had heard that, street vendors, other brethren that we would meet say, Mzungu, and they would point, and little children singing Mzungu, Mzungu in the streets, pointing all the while. Andrew asked our driver, what is this word? He asked Zuberai, our driver, or he wasn't our driver, he was our guide and fellow preacher. He was the preacher at the New Work in Mwanambaya. And he traveled with us as kind of our guide and often as our bodyguard. He's the one I told you about who would say, many thieves, guard your possessions. Andrew asked Zuberai one time as we were driving, what is this word? What is Mzungu? He smiled and he said, oh, nothing bad. It just means white man. We don't call you white because white is the color of paper and you are not that, so we say Mzungu. Andrew was intrigued And so he spent that night and the next day in research studying this word Mzungu, and then he would regale us at breakfast the next morning with his findings. And that's kind of what I'm going to be sharing with you. Mzungu, literally translated, means a person who walks in circles. This coming from the Tanzania Customs and Cultures. Tanzania Custom and Culture says it's the name reserved for Westerners. It's advisable to abandon any irritation with the tag early in your stay. Depending on the length of your visit, you might hear it thousands of times. So in the very guidebook going to Tanzania, if only I'd read that beforehand, we would have known this is who you are when you come to our country. And you're going to hear it thousands of times. And that was no joke. People along the streets in the markets would yell, "Hey, Mzungu, over here." They would promise to give us, I heard so many times in the one day we went shopping specifically before a Bible study that afternoon, we got up really early, probably with the Muslim prayers, and hit the road to hit all the shops that were open after that. And one of the things that we heard all the time was, "Hey, Mzungu, come here. I give you Tanzania price, not Mzungu price." And I'm pretty sure, as Andrew and I compared notes later in the afternoon, I'm pretty sure we paid a lot of Mzungu prices. Little children in the street would sing Mzungu, Mzungu as they pointed and laughed. And would say, "Jambo." We were told that's the right answer. Just yell Jambo, which meant hello or greetings. The etymology of the word Andrew found was hilarious. It came about when white men started showing up to colonize East Africa in the 1700s and 1800s. These Europeans did not speak the language. They looked lost and confused all the time. They walked in circles until they became dizzy. And so Mzungu has taken on another meaning completely, where it means dizzy-headed. It's dizzy-headed people, so overwhelmed, so confused by their strange surroundings, they don't fit in, and they're not from there. That's what they mean when they say Mzungu. It means one who walks in circles, a wanderer. They're dizzy. We were the only, until about our last day there, we were the only Caucasians around anywhere we went. We kept saying, "Where are the other tourists?" We didn't see them until around our last couple days there at the hotel. We saw some Europeans at another table, and one was an Australian. It was interesting to hear him talk, telling his stories. But we didn't see them out and about in town. We saw them at the hotel the last couple nights, but wherever we went, we stood out. We did not speak Swahili. We had to use interpreters. We tried not to wear flashy clothing. We wanted to kind of blend in. We didn't want to stand out or attract attention to ourselves. And we quickly found out that was all in vain. No matter where we went, no matter what we wore, we stood out. We caused notice. Andrew pointed us to a couple of articles one morning, one written by an expat in Uganda about her experiences as a Mzungu, and another by a reporter in Rwanda. Both said, Mzungu is not just about the color of your skin. It also describes mannerisms, appearance, and behavior. How you behave while in this foreign land also is tied in with this word Mzungu. I want to share with you what Andrew told us about the Rwandan reporter. His name is Alan Brian Senyonga. He's a Ugandan reporter who was in Rwanda, and he wrote about Mzungu in the New Times called, "Yes, It's Obvious You Are a Mzungu." If you want to, I'm just going to quote a few excerpts from his article. If you want to read the whole thing, if you download it off the website, the outline has the link, has the article attached at the back as well as the link, and the PowerPoint has the link attached to it in the notes section. So if you want to, you can download that and read this whole article. This is just a screenshot of the beginning of it, so you see the title and the author. I'm going to quote from just a few excerpts of what he says about Mzungus. This is from his being a reporter, a Ugandan reporter in Rwanda, and things that he saw, but they are also applicable to what we experienced in Tanzania. He says, there is the budget Mzungu. This one is often seen with a huge dirty backpack, a sun hat, sunglasses, a digital camera in hand, and he or she occasionally stops to check on their map to see if they're heading in the right direction. One of our last days there, as we were trekking to the Indian Ocean, we saw a bus pull up at a bus stop, and a bunch of tourists get out, about 15 of them, and they all fit this bill. We were laughing, and we all kind of pointed. We looked at each other and pointed and said quietly to each other, Mzungu, because they looked like the budget Mzungu this guy described. This guy goes on to describe Mzungus. He says, their Mzungu-ness is often exhibited by their ability to tell the different coffee flavors apart. Whereas locals know there's coffee, there's tea, and both are better with milk. So that's what the locals were. It was really funny at the hotel in the morning. We'd go to the coffee station and they would ask us, we think we know what you want, so they would have all these things spread out, and sometimes we said, no, we just want one or two of those things. They expected us to dump all of those things into our coffee, and they were shocked when we didn't, because they said, that's what most Mzungu do. They're dumping syrup, they're dumping sugar, they're dumping the cream, they're dumping everything, so they had all these things lined up in front of the coffee machines. It was very interesting. This guy goes on to say, a Mzungu is only seen reading one of two books, either a huge volume on Africa or a book precisely about the 1994 Rwandan genocide. So again, he's talking about his experience in Rwanda. A Mzungu has to respond to emails from concerned loved ones back in Europe and America asking them if they're doing okay in Africa. Not Rwanda, not Uganda, not Tanzania, Africa. And it was funny, as Andrew was reading this article to us, I whipped out my phone, pulled up a bunch of WhatsApp messages I had from the brethren here saying, are you okay in Africa? How are you doing in Africa? I said, Mzungu. Some of you did not ask, how are you doing in Tanzania? You said, how are you doing in Africa? And I was able to show those, and we laughed. And I appreciated those texts, by the way. It came through WhatsApp, but I appreciated you checking on me. It was just funny when we read this article to get this guy's perspective. He says they just lump everything as Africa, not Rwanda and Uganda and Tanzania, whatever. He says the only downside to being Mzungu is that the locals, especially those selling crafts, tend to have a different, often higher price for you. And yes, I can tell you that is the case. Oftentimes, Zuberi would take our money and say, let me go get you a good price. And we would hear him say, I'm not Mzungu. And he would pay a different price than what they wanted to charge us. And so I can tell you the price for Mzungu was higher than the Tanzanian price. He says, an inquisitive eye will notice a water bottle sticking from the side of the laptop bag they carry. A Mzungu always carries his water with him. I can tell you, we left the hotel each with 2 or 3 water bottles every day. So when Andrew read this part of the article, we're all sitting there laughing because I've got water bottles poking out of my laptop bag. The zippers barely close. He says the Mzungu will not forget to swallow his anti-malarial tablets or smear themselves with mosquito-repelling lotion. We took our anti-malarial pills every day and checked on one another to make sure the 3 of us had all taken the pill before we left the hotel. So again, we had a good laugh at our own expense. He says Mzungu dress style often revolves around t-shirts and jeans or multi-pocketed tour trousers plus sandals. Some simply wear flip-flops, considered bathroom wear by locals as they stroll on our clean streets. And he labeled this as the bathroom Mzungu. The funny part of this is, as Andrew read this part to Ed and I, Andrew and I looked down and realized the pants we were wearing had about 50 pockets. Then one of us, I'm not going to reveal who, one of us put his feet out from under the table where we sat and revealed he was wearing flip-flops, red, white, and blue flip-flops, no less. And we pointed at each other and all yelled, Mzungu! Without trying, without even thinking about it, we stood out for our mannerisms, our appearance, and even our behavior. And Mzungu stands out in ways he doesn't even realize. There was a lot more to it than just the color of our skin. That was obvious that we were Caucasian. The Tanzanian people are a very friendly people, and they were our hospitable people. And the brethren were wonderful, and they took great care of us. And they were concerned about our safety and our well-being. And so they provided water. A lot of our water bottles, the excess that we had, came from the brethren. There was water bottles everywhere we went that they made sure we were taken care of. But there was no hiding it. And there was no denying that when we were among them, that we were Mzungu. I was in that world, but I was not of that world. And it wasn't some little secret that I kept inside that nobody else knew. Everybody else knew I didn't fit in. I didn't belong. I was there, but I was not part of it. I couldn't have hid it if I wanted to. I gave myself away in the way I talked, my mannerisms, my behavior, even the idioms that I use. Several times we used a metaphor or an idiom, and it caused consternation among them. They'd say, why you say this? I once said that we were talking about the heat, and I said I was sweating bullets. And our driver said, why you say this? Bullets don't sweat. And we're like, no, don't translate that. Don't translate that. And I gave myself away just in the very mannerisms in the way that I spoke. I gave myself away as Mzungu in many ways I didn't even realize. And as Andrew pointed out, it reminded him, and thus me, of John 17, 13 to 18. I want to read this to you this morning. This is going to be our base text as we talk about it. In John 17, 13, 18, he says, "But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, so that they may have my joy made full in themselves." This is the Lord's Prayer in the night that he's about to be betrayed. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's asked 3 of his best friends and of the 12 apostles to keep watch and to pray and to keep falling asleep. And these are the things that are on his mind. He's speaking about his apostles, and he says, "I've given them your word, and the world has hated them because they're not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world." He's going to go on and talk about you and I, those who come after the apostles, those who believe their word and are going to have the same thing happen to us that they did. The world will hate us because we're not of it. He says they're not of the world. And he points out, because I'm not of the world. Jesus says, I didn't belong here either. But he was here, and he was here to do a mission. Now, he makes a very poignant point here, that we can't be taken out of the world. No matter how much we try to isolate and shelter ourselves from the world, we're going to be touched by it in some way, in some fashion. It's going to be on us, on how we handle that, how we deal with that. Like when I was in Tanzania, everyone could tell I didn't fit in. But I was there for a job. I was there to do something. And yes, we had to work through interpreters, but we encouraged and we preached as much and as often as we could. It's how we use the time that we're given. And as I reflect upon the Lord's Prayer here in John 17, 13 to 18, I hope this is the sort of Christian that I am. And I hope this is the sort of Christian that you are. So distinctly Christian, so deeply Christian, so genuinely a Christian, that it shines forth in ways you don't even realize. And the world has no other option but to see you for who you are, to know that you are different, to know that you belong to Christ. You are a child of God, and it ought to be known in your mannerisms, your appearance, and your attitudes and behavior, and the very things that you say. You are distinct. And that's what I want to encourage you to be today. To be in the world, but not of the world. To be distinct. And so we're going to talk about being distinct in 3 ways. One, I want to remind you as Christians, embrace your distinction. There was no getting away from who I was there. We just had to embrace it. As people, Andrew and I, as people called out to us from the street and pointed and yelled Mzungu, we held our hands up in the air and yelled back, Mzungu! And it made everyone laugh, and it made other people point and call us that same name too. We embraced it because there was no getting around it. There was no hiding it. There was no denying it. We couldn't say, no, I'm not. We were. As Christians, when the world recognizes you as Christian, embrace it. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to deny it. When you finally figure out what a Mzungu is and you have to laugh because you're Mzungu all over, you embrace it. It's freeing. You are what you are in this different world and culture. As Christians in this world, embrace it. Many ways the Lord tells us to be distinct. because you are distinct in Jesus. In Matthew 5:13, he describes it as salt of the earth. Salt flavors the food. Salt contacts the food. Salt is part of the food, but it's distinct. It's different. Salt is distinct from the food that you add it to. Jesus says you are the salt of the earth. He says you are the light of the world in Matthew 5:14-16. Darkness is the absence of light. Darkness does not comprehend the light. Darkness is driven back by the light. Jesus says you are that light. He says, let it shine in such a way that men see it and they glorify God who is in heaven by the things that you do. We only do that if we embrace who we are. We only do that if we recognize the way the world does that we are different. Be distinct and embrace it. Jesus described it in Matthew 5:14 as a city on a hill. It can't hide. The city on a hill cannot hide. The people are going to see the lights from a great distance, and they're going to know there's life there. People will see the light within you. Be that light. You know, in Andrew's case, I didn't have that. You all know me. I didn't have this problem, but Andrew did. You saw in that picture, Andrew, and you met Andrew 3 years ago. Andrew's tall. Andrew is not only white, but he was tall. He was so tall, he towered over most of everyone else on the street in Tanzania, with one exception. And the only exception that comes to mind was Zuberai, who I told you about, our fellow preacher at Mwanambaya, our guide, our bodyguard. Zuberai was a professional footballer. He was a soccer player for Tanzania, and he's since retired. He is a big guy. He gives Andrew a run for his money, and he's got him on height and just being big. And so Andrew did not tower over Zuberai, but everyone else, both our drivers, everyone else on the street, Andrew drew attention to our little group because he was also that towering Mzungu. It was funny, the staff at the hotel got to know us. It was almost the same staff in the evening and in the morning with slight variation. And one morning, Andrew said he was too busy. We were working on some requests that we had to present that afternoon. We didn't bring anything for it. So we spent late hours into the night. We got up early that morning and we were working. I wasn't done yet, but I said, I need to eat. I've got to take my meds with food. So I went down to breakfast. Andrew said, I'm not coming to breakfast. I'm going to skip it and I'll be down. I'll be down for later. Well, when I came down to breakfast and Ed was already there, this young lady that got used to seeing us, she came running up to me and she said, where's your friend? And I said, my friend. And she said, the big one. I miss him. And I said, oh. She said, is he sick? And I said, no. He's working. He's in the room. He's okay. He'll be down later. And I told Andrew that, and he thought that was just hilarious. And she came running up to him the next time she saw him. But it was just funny how she described him. The big one. So Andrew drew notice wherever he went. Jesus goes on to say, you are a special people. 1 Peter 2, 9-10. Peter drawing on what Jesus said, that we are the salt, we are the light, we are the city on the hill that cannot be hidden. Peter says, you are God's special people. He says, you're a peculiar people. That means a distinct people. You stand out from everyone else. 1 Peter 2, 11-12, he continues on that thought, and he describes Christians as sojourners and pilgrims. You know, the hymn that we're about to sing, This World Is Not My Home, written in 1937 by Albert Brumley. It says, this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. That's really how Peter describes our life. We're sojourners and pilgrims. We're not residents. We're not citizens. We don't belong here. Like Abraham, who always dwelt in tents, he was journeying, following God, wherever God led him. Why then are we sometimes tempted to blend in with the world at times? Do we think people or friends will like us more if we hide our faith? I think sometimes we think that. Are we afraid people will hate us or persecute us if they learn of our convictions? I think sometimes that's our fear. Do we think this world is where it's at, that this is where we get the best stuff? This is where we have the most fun? This is where it's all at now, and then we look out for number one because that's all that there is. I think sometimes we get distracted by that. Jesus certainly said that in the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, Mark 4, and Luke 8, especially the Luke 8 passage where he's describing the thorny soil Christian. He says this thorny soil Christian, he has the word choked out of him, but this is not an overnight sensation. This is something that takes place over time as this Christian is lured away, it says, by the deceitfulness of riches, the cares of this world, and it says the pleasures of this life. I think it's easy to get distracted because the world has all the shiny things around us that we want. Even things that are lawful to us, things that are moral, but if they take our focus away from God, they can become sin. We know better than all of that. We know better. And yet Jesus is describing Christians who become unfruitful because the word is choked out of them, because of other things. Christians cannot hide. Matthew 5:14 says, we're a city on a hill. When I walked down a road in Dar es Salaam, strangers called, they greeted me, they waved, they yelled Mzungu. I could not hide. Christians, you don't hide. You stand out. As Christians, we will stand out. Here's some ways that we stand out. Our appearance is modest. 1 Timothy 2, 9-10. You might not always wear pants with 50 pockets like a Mzungu. But you'll wear clothing that's modest and befitting who you are as a Christian. 1 Timothy 2, 9-10. Your dress is appropriate to occasion. You're mindful that your body belongs to the Lord and is not your own. So you honor him and you respect him in the very way that you dress. Christians will be distinct as a city on a hill because their speech is appropriate. Philippians 2, 14-15, Colossians 4, 5-6, Ephesians 4:15 and verse 29 through 31, and 1 Peter 2, 1. I'm reminded as I think about this, that speech gives away who we are. And I told you a little example of how I did it on a couple of occasions. Andrew certainly did it on a couple of occasions. Ed was the more experienced out of us. I think he got away with it more than we did because he was more accustomed to the way that they speak there. But I'm reminded of Peter. There as Jesus is undergoing this unlawful trial through the middle of the night at the high priest Caiaphas' house. And Peter is in the courtyard and someone begins to address him and to recognize him as being with Jesus. And he says, no, I don't know him. And then a little while later, another servant says, hey, aren't you a Galilean? You were with him. No, I don't know him. And on the third time, when someone came up to Peter and said, aren't you a Galilean? Aren't you with Jesus? You remember what he did? To emphasize the point that he was not with Jesus, he began to curse and to swear, to emphasize, I don't know the man. Peter said, you think my speech gives away who I am? Let me tell you who I am. And he spoke in a way that would definitely not belong in the presence of Jesus. Speech gives us away. We're told that our speech is to be appropriate to the occasion. Christian speech is to be in love, seasoned with grace and for edification. That is encouragement and be being built up. A saint won't blend in, for even their speech will give them away. Does your speech give you away? In a positive sense? Where people listen to you talk, they listen how you describe, how you go through life, even the unpleasantness of life, and do they say, you're a Christian? They ought to, because we're a city on a hill. We're to be distinct. A Christian's manner of life is commendable. Peter says in 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles. Their manner of life is commendable. I'm going to talk about a few ways that our life can be seen as being commendable, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles. Honest work and dealings. Honest work and dealings. Colossians 3, 22-25, 1 Peter 2, 18 and 19 tells us that we work for the Lord. He is our employer. When we are on the job site, no matter what we're doing, no matter who sees or doesn't see, Jesus sees. He is our employer. We will be honest when we work with others. We'll be honest with our employer. We'll be honest with our employees. If we're the employer, we'll be honest with our coworkers. And we'll stand out. We'll be different. I knew of people that at a certain job that I had, it was real easy to mess with the time clock. And they would leave 10 to 15 minutes early, sometimes a lot earlier than that, and fudge the clock to where they got their full pay. And they said, everybody's doing it, and they showed me how to do it. And I said, I can't do that. I won't do that. And I got called names. Are you going to turn us in? Are you goody two-shoes? You remember that phrase? And I said, no, that's just dishonest, and I can't do it. I stood out because, yes, I found out even managers were doing it. Everybody was doing it. And I stood out because I refused. A Christian will have honest work and dealings with their people, with their employers, with their employees, and with their coworkers, because we're called to be distinct. Your manner of life will be commendable among Gentiles because you will believe in, you will teach, you will practice marriage, not fornication or adultery, not cohabitation. Our culture today tells us the natural progression in dating is to then live together. No, that's not what the Bible teaches. That's not what God has taught. That hasn't been what God has said in any time period. As a testament to your faith, your conviction of living according to God's word, they will see you say no. The next step in our relationship will be a proposal. And then even then, not cohabitation, but moving in after the marriage. Today, we live in a world where the world will not make you get married. There's no stigma attached to shacking up. In fact, many people in the world celebrate it. We had a cashier once tell my wife and I, she moved in with her boyfriend, and she was telling us in an excited way she wanted us to be happy for her. And she said, yeah, we chose to live in sin. Just was out there with it. And we were kind of just shaking our heads saying, there's a better way. You didn't have to do that. In today's culture, how special is a 50th anniversary? We celebrate that. We honor that, because that's not what our culture teaches nor celebrates. And raising children. Ephesians 6:1-4, kids will be kids, and there's no perfect children, just like there's no perfect parents. However, a Christian home stands out when your kids have friends over from school or from neighborhood kids come over to play. I found out that Andrew's experience was a lot like mine. Growing up, my house seemed to be the house to be at, and friends thought it was weird that my family would eat dinner together at one table, that we prayed before each meal. And they would say, we don't do this at home. And they wanted to come over to dinner because they liked that aspect that when my mother made sure that we all sat at one table. There were special occasions we got to sit in front of the TV, but those were special occasions, very rare. When dinner was served, we sat together as a family at the table. And when we had friends over, they were just amazed, and they felt like they were in a strange land. Because they said, my family's just come as you go. Come and go as you want. And then eat and sit wherever you want. And they said, we like this. And so we had friends at our house all the time. Christians, your friends can see the difference. Parents, the friends of your kids can see a difference in the way that you raise your children. Going back to being that city on a hill, Christians are described as hearts being generous. Jesus says in Mark 12:29-31, Matthew 5:43-44, you will love your neighbors and you will love your enemies. This is perhaps one of the hardest things Jesus ever taught, is that we're to love our enemies. Loving those who love us, that comes naturally. It's easy to love those who love us, but when Jesus says you're to love those who hate you, who persecute you, who want to see harm done to you, that's tough. How do we do that? Well, we were told an interesting story while we were there in Tanzania by Zuberi himself. I want to share it with you. I feel it's appropriate at this time. Zuberi built a new house. And he built a new house because he was an elder at one of the congregations in Dar es Salaam. And he spoke with the elders, and it was a mutual agreement that he would leave. And they had other elders there, so they're still in eldership at that congregation. But Zuberi left to begin a new work in Mwanambaya. It's been going on for less than a year. And he felt that he was needed. There was no congregation there. There were a lot of people there. And he felt like he needed to leave the congregation that he was at. And so he broke away and started this new work. Well, one of the things he wanted to do is he needed a house and property that would house a congregation. And so he built this new house, he built this property, and to house that many people, he needed a large well. And there was a lot of I found out there was a lot of congregations here in the U.S. that helped provide him the support that he needed. And he dug and built this amazing well that he could house multitudes of people at his house and on his property. And our last Sunday there, we got to be there with that congregation and see how much they have grown. Well, he told us that when he moved there and began building, especially building this well, his neighbors, who are all Muslim, found out he's Christian. Because again, Christians are going to stand out. And they threatened him. He had mobs come to his house and threatened that they're going to find him. They're going to beat him up. They're going to steal his stuff and his things. But then there was a slight drought. And those same Muslim neighbors came to his house asking for water. And as he just happily doled out water from his new well, they tried to pay him money. And he said, "No, I won't take your money. Just take the water." And they said, "How could you do this? After all the things we said, after all the threats we made against you, how do you just give us water and not charge us for it? Do you think yourself a holy man? Do you think you're better than us?" He said, "No, I'm a Christian. This is what Christians do." And you know, the Muslims have been coming to his congregation. They've been coming. When we were there were 4 Muslim ladies that were there that sat. They didn't even sit in the back. They kind of came towards the front and sat behind us. Because they said, "That's different. That's different." They threatened him. They threatened his family. And he gave them water free of charge. You know, Jesus does that for us. He says at the end of Revelation, "The one who is thirsty, come. I will give him the waters of life without cost." We cannot be ashamed of who we are in Christ. Embrace that distinction. We cannot be otherwise. It's going to come out anyway, and it comes out in ways that we don't even recognize. So Christians, protect your distinction. A Mzungu is dizzied, perplexed by all surroundings. It's a strange place for him. What a good analogy for Christians. Don't become comfortable with this world. Don't become comfortable with this society and the way it wants things to be done. Don't be a chameleon that blends in your surroundings. Stand out and protect your distinction. What if we lose our distinction? What if we become like the world? What if our mind and behavior simply mirrors the world and culture around us? Remember what Jesus says. Salt loses savor. Matthew 5:13. What is it good for when that happens? It's no longer good for preservation and flavor. He says it's to be trampled underground. Salt loses savor. Light under a basket. Jesus says, Matthew 5:14-15, you're to let your light shine. He says you don't light a candle and hide it under a basket. But what happens if we lose our distinction? Like salt losing its savor, like a light under a basket, it's fruitless. It's vanity. Lukewarm to the taste. Revelation 3:15-16. Jesus said to the church at Laodicea that he wanted to vomit them out because they made him sick. Protect your senses to notice sin and discern temptation. There is virtue in being vexed and pained by the wickedness of this world. Peter used Lot as an example. In 2 Peter 2:7-8, he said he was vexed daily in his soul. Maybe your ears hurt by blasphemy and cursing from James 3 and verse 10. And it's scary when you hear it and it stops bothering you. It should be jarring because it's not our vocabulary. It's not our speech. Our speech is different from the world. Sometimes you catch yourself singing along with the radio one day and it just hits you. This song isn't good. This song is calling women bad names, or it's all about drinking at clubs and spending the weekend hungover. Maybe you shouldn't be singing along with that song. Maybe you should turn the channel. Christians need to be able to blush at lewd and lasciviousness, to blush at immorality. As Jeremiah 6:15 and 8:12, God charged his people, Judah, with being unable to blush. It meant that nothing surprise them anymore. They were just accepting all manner of immorality. The Israelites had lost all shame in their abominations. Nothing embarrassed them anymore. We live in a culture of screens and video, streaming services. We're bombarded with countless images everywhere we turn. There's desensitizing effect everywhere around us, and it desensitizes very quickly. And it happens. I find myself suddenly becoming aware of this billboard that we pass daily with the kids, that I don't even notice it anymore, but I'm sure they do with their young eyes. We need to be careful. We need to protect that distinctness. The Tinder dating app phenomenon of a couple years ago where you swipe left or swipe right. A preacher friend of mine had a single preacher intern that had it on his phone. And the preacher recounted this story to me. The preacher said to him, "I think you ought to get rid of that app." And the young preaching intern who was single, he said, "Why? I don't see anything wrong with it." And the preacher said to him, "Do you think the sisters are putting their pictures on there?" And he said, "Well, no, I haven't seen a single sister on here." And the preacher friend of mine said, "How do you think the sisters would feel to know that you make these judgments about women solely on their looks? You just simply swipe them away." And he said, "Oh, I haven't thought about that. Who should he be looking to date?" Sisters. And this preacher was driving home a point. You're going to drive them away when they find out who you look for and how you look. Apps like that train people to objectify other people. And once you're objectifying people, there's not much you'll blush at. Righteous indignation is healthy. 2 Corinthians 11:29. When we see sin and evil, do we think it's funny? Do we cheer it on? Or does it trouble us? Does it vex us? Does it even anger us? Expose works of darkness. That's what we're called to do as light. Ephesians 5:8-12. Don't become desensitized. Don't befriend the world. Be distinct. James 4:4-5 says, when you become a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. That's not a good place we want to be in as Christians. Don't befriend the world. Be distinct. That Mzungu is just dizzy being in a strange place. There's nothing wrong with being dizzy. As Christians in this world, let's be dizzy. Let's stay bewildered because it's not our home, and it ought to vex us, and it ought to even anger us at times. May the lust of the eyes, the lust of flesh, and the pride of life be strange places for Christians. And Christians, lastly and very shortly, confess your distinction. In Tanzania, the people want to meet a Mzungu. They want to have what he or she has. The culture book explains that people call out to you not to embarrass or scare you, but because they want you to notice them. When they call out to us Mzungu and the kids sing Mzungu, they want our attention. That's what the custom book goes on to tell us. That they want to be noticed. They want us to notice them. They'd like to meet you, it says, make friends with you, maybe do business with you. There's an impression that Mzungu have bottomless pockets, and we certainly saw that as well. People in the world want what a Christian has, because a Christian is distinct. Light draws you in. Salt is good. City on a hill has protection. When they see you have goodness, righteousness, and truth, Ephesians 5:9, the fruit of the light, people want what you have. People want what you have when they see you have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5:21-23. People in the world want what you have when they see you have a living hope. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3. These are things that come out in your mannerism, your speech, your behavior, and your attitude. These things are hard to hide, and they come out in ways we don't even realize. The very way we help people, whether they ask for it or not. Someone may say to you, I want what you have. What is your secret? Tell them, I'm a Christian. That's why I have what I have. That's why I am what I am. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. People take note in the way you treat them. in the softness of your voice, the gentleness and meekness of your conduct, and the very words that you use, that no matter what they say or how threatening they are, that you build up, that you edify. In Matthew 10:32-33, Jesus said, "Therefore, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven." And Colossians 4:5-6, "Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so you'll know how you should respond to each person." He's telling us in the very way that we talk to other people, they ought to know who we are. People will ask you, what is the reason for your hope? People sometimes have questions about living like a Christian. Sometimes they ask you about the teachings of a Christian. What do you believe? People will sometimes just bluntly ask you, are you a Christian? Say, yes, I am. Confess your distinction as you confess Jesus by the way you live your life. Matthew 10:32 says we're to confess him. Sometimes it's just people observing the way we behave that we confess who we are. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. We're about to sing the hymn, "This world is not my home." In John 17:15-16, Jesus says, "I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world." Paul wrote to the Philippian saints in Philippians 3:20, "For our citizenship is in heaven, from which also we eagerly wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ." This world is not our home. Our citizenship is in heaven. A Caucasian in Africa is a Mzungu and will stand out. A Christian, no matter what their ethnicity or background, will stand out in this world and will be distinct. My challenge and admonition and encouragement for you this morning is embrace the distinction, protect the distinction, and confess the distinction. In this world, wherever we go, let us stand out for belonging to Jesus and being a Christian. If you're not a Christian this morning, we urge you to become one. Yes, you will stand out. Your friends will take notice, but there will be a great reward stored up in heaven for you. But Jesus says we have a home with him in heaven for all eternity, for those who believe and are baptized into his name. This morning, if you are a Christian, not living the way that you should, perhaps you've lost your distinction. Remember what Jesus says about salt that loses its savor, a light that is hid under a basket. It's good for nothing. Don't be good for nothing. You belong to Christ. Own it, embrace it, and remove whatever barrier of sin keeps you from your God this morning. And if we can assist you in anything, the waters of baptism, the prayers of the congregation on your behalf, come forward, let it be known. While together we stand and sing.